How do our most senior leaders feel about the direction and trajectory of our industry? What's their outlook on the future state of wholesaling, and, based on their considerable experiences, what lessons would they help us all learn? That's what we want to find out in this special series of episodes we're calling Lessons from Leaders. Welcome to the only podcast on the planet dedicated to exploring the art, science, and lifestyle of wholesalers and their leaders. This is the new Wholesaler Masterminds Radio Show. I'm your host, the founder of Wholesaler Masterminds, Rob Shore. This episode of Lessons from Leaders is sponsored by the Money Management Institute and their Center for Distribution Excellence. MMI is the industry association that connects all participants, including asset managers, platform sponsors, and technology providers in the always changing and rapidly growing advisory solutions world. The new Center for Distribution Excellence, built by and for financial industry sales professionals, is dedicated to discovering, promoting, and improving best practices in the wholesaling community. In Industry First, the center brings together a comprehensive suite of events, networking opportunities, and educational resources, all designed to help sales professionals interact with their counterparts from across the industry and learn from the best of the best. For more information about the Center for Distribution Excellence, call MMI at 646-868-8500. That's 646-868-8500, or visit MMINST.org. Wholesalers, welcome back to another episode of the new Wholesaler Masterminds Radio Show. Lessons from Leaders is the series of episodes that we're doing today. I got to tell you, I had a shower moment. I had a shower moment. The shower moment was, I need to reach out to an esteemed leader in our business who has been in meaningful and significant positions of leadership for 30 years. And he is headed down the last bit of the downhill slope on the way to retirement, and we are catching him as he's just about headed out the door. And I couldn't be more delighted to talk through our 6 questions, our 6 lessons from leader questions, and a whole bunch of other stuff with the one and only Jim Jessee. Jim Jessee, welcome to the new Wholesaler Masterminds Radio Show.
Thanks, Rob. I'm excited and kind of humbled that you asked me to do this, but I'm glad to share some thoughts here.
I'm just delighted to have you here. You've been a friend of Wholesaler Masterminds for a long time. If you may recall, you were the first leader that we ever interviewed in I Carry the Bag magazine.
I do recall that. Yes.
Going back some time ago.
Yes.
All right. So normally, as our listeners know, I would read the corporate PR written bio intro. But I want to go about this a little bit differently. There's just a lot to talk about as we kind of walk down memory lane when we look at your background, which I said and I meant is quite illustrious and esteemed. And I think the most important thing for listeners to know is Jim is the quintessential distribution professional, and it starts with how you got your start in this business. And maybe we don't necessarily need to look, unless you wish, at Minnesota Mutual, but your ascent into wholesaling, if I have it correct, was when you started as a field wholesaler in 1987. Is that correct?
That's right. I was covering basically the wirehouses and regional brokerage firms in the southeastern part of the United States. I started January of 87. Frankly, knew very little about the role of a wholesaler, other than the fact I had a brother who was doing it with MFS up in Virginia. When I talked to him about the potential to join the company, as he described what he did, I thought it sounded very interesting. When he told me the income potential, Rob, I thought this is definitely a business I'd like to be a part of. The first half of my career, the first 15 years, was wholesaling Carolinas and Georgia and covering wirehouses, regional broker-dealer firms.
Now, did I read in some of the pre-work that we were going back and forth on, you actually had 2 brothers or 2 members of your family that were wholesalers prior to you becoming a wholesaler?
Actually, one brother who was before me, and both he and my youngest brother still are with MFS. One is a 401k specialist, DCIO specialist in Virginia. My brother Tom is the divisional sales manager for the Mid-Atlantic for MFS. So, yeah, we clearly had a weak nepotism policy in the mid-'80s at MFS that the Jessee brothers were able to take advantage of.
That is awesome. So here you are. You're carrying the bag, obviously very successful. And like most wholesalers, you got an itch which you had to scratch was, I want to go try management, right?
Well, not exactly. To tell the truth, if we were having this conversation as recently as the summer of 2001, I would have said to you very sincerely, Rob, my career goal is to retire from MFS in the Southeast as a wholesaler. I had obviously done it for 15 years, loved the territory, had pretty solid relationships with the FAs and Center of Influence, and really thought the work I was doing was very important and really, really thoroughly enjoyed it. I got a call by somebody in a senior role with MFS who I have a high degree of respect for in the summer of 2001, and he said, hey, Jim, I'd like you to consider coming up to Boston and going into a leadership role, which frankly really took me aback. I had never worked in an office in my life. I had never managed anyone prior to that. And I asked him, I said, why do you want me to do it? And he said, I really respect the way that you and your brothers have built the territory, represent the firm, and I would like you to be part of maybe passing that on to the next generation of MFS wholesalers. And that was very impactful to me. They said that. And as I thought about people who had been leaders or mentors of mine earlier, I thought maybe I should consider something different. So it was, I was surprised. I didn't really see it myself of being a home office person. But I came up here in the fall of 2001, and now, as he said, I'm getting ready to retire from the firm very shortly. So I guess I'd say I was a reluctant person going into management.
Yeah, but it all worked out. But what was the biggest difference? So we have wholesalers. We're going to use you to pick your brain a little bit since you did make that transition. What were some of the biggest differences? How did you have to kind of rearrange your thoughts, rearrange your process? I did it. You did it. You have to rewire a lot of how you think. But if let's just take the number 3. What are the 3 biggest differences? If there's a wholesaler out there listening, going, I'm really thinking about going into management, and I actually wrote a long post on this, wholesalers, if you want to go out and find it on the website about a month ago. If there's 3 things that you think a wholesaler should pay close attention to when they contemplate going into management, what do you think those 3 things should be?
Well, the first for me was there was a comfort level that I had. I most years my territory was one of the better ones in the company. And so, frankly, from a security standpoint, in the back of my mind is always that, hey, I'm bringing revenue in. I'm close to the clients. And so there was a sense of security. I knew that the firm would always need people who are good at that. The second was, as a wholesaler, pretty much you're paid to build relationships and be adaptable in dealing with many different types of clients. And there's, a high premium on being fairly likable. Mm-hmm. I thought, there are going to be times in a leadership role, management situation, that I may have to make some decisions that aren't exactly real likable. Yep. And to me, I told myself that if I couldn't do that, it wasn't fair to the firm, the employees, and frankly our clients, that if I could not at times have to make what is something that I thought is going to be maybe difficult for some people to hear.
Yeah.
And then the third was just the flexibility. Look, as your audience knows, as a wholesaler, you're running all over the place. You're working long hours, but there is some flexibility. As I said earlier, I had never worked in an office in my life, so the fact that I had to show up at some place every day, that just mentally was a bit of a challenge. I guess the last thing, I know you asked for 3, I'll give you 4.
Yeah.
I really valued and still continue to value the relationship that I had with the financial advisors. I mean, I really enjoyed the time with most of them. We all have some that maybe we don't miss as much, but that was a hard thing. I thought, gosh, I really hate giving up those relationships. And so when I came up to Boston, frankly, part of my leadership style was to try to replicate the relationships here internally, and not just with the salespeople. I mean, some of the people I've worked with really closely are in areas of compliance and the marketing side and product development. So maybe use those relationships that used to be more outwardly facing as a way to work more cohesively with the internal partners at MFS. And now, again, as I'm getting ready to retire, I have a lot of folks from that area saying, "Hey, Jim, it was great that you always asked our opinion, brought us closer to the conversation," and I think that was a smart decision from just bringing subject matter experts to the management team.
You know, it's a great lesson, not just for wholesalers that are thinking about making the ascent into management. It's also a great lesson, and perhaps a timely nuance of the lesson in what's happening in the economy, which is to say, you know, market's choppy. We don't know when the next recession will be. We don't know when firms are going to pull back. We don't know what tough decisions are going to need to be made in staffing. And wholesalers, when senior leaders like Jim are looking at the viability of the wholesaling force, the decisions that need to be made from a profitability standpoint about what we're going to do in terms of headcount, when we start looking at people, some of the things that we look at are some of the things that Jim speaks about. And I don't mean from a management standpoint. I mean from a team standpoint, from a firm engagement standpoint. Who has relationships that go across, as you say, Jim, with product, with compliance, with legal, who's easy to work with and who's a pain in the ass. I mean, it's some of those hard decisions are fed by that. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I very, very much so. And, look, as you've pointed out in articles you've written and conferences I've heard you speak at and in past broadcasts like this, the business is changing very rapidly. And I think we need distribution folks who can adapt and take their core skill set, but apply it maybe in a quickly evolving business. I think the people being left behind, Rob, right now are folks who say, hey, 15, 20 years ago, this worked great for me. I'm going to run the same play.
Yeah.
And our clients are run the same play. And so what I try to encourage our team is the core skill sets are still transferable, but you need to keep upping the game. And particularly, I think wholesalers, and again, when I say wholesalers, I could apply it to key account managers, internals. You need a really strong business process to keep up with the number of things you have to be doing today.
Let me interrupt for 1 second, because I know everything you're about to say is super valuable, but I want to make sure that those folks, if there's anybody out there that doesn't know you, heaven forbid, I want to make sure everybody's got the right context of from whence you speak. So all we did so far was talk about the fact that you carried the bag for 15 years. You got a call and somebody said, hey, come to Boston. But we got to fill in just a little bit of the rest of the blank so people understand the context, the why what you say has resonance. So you did a brief stint with Director of Dealer Relations. That was but a year. But then you move into becoming president of MFS Fund Distributors. So in that role, what was your purview in that role?
Well, basically, I was the president of the broker-dealer for FINRA purposes. I was responsible for all of our sales, marketing, product development of what we were doing in the U.S. Retail marketplace, which we're a financial intermediary model, so not going direct to the consumer. I will say, coming back to the dealer relations side, because that's basically what we call our key account group.
Yes.
It was actually 2 years. Those 2 years of learning the corporate relationship with the home offices of our big clients, that was invaluable. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I could have made that president move if I didn't have a view in terms of what is the overall corporate relationship that we have with the big intermediaries, whether it's obviously the marketing campaigns, how we're better interacting with them, some of the financial considerations. So I actually think that the key account role was critical. And so, I moved into the president of the sales company in 2004. And, that was a tough period for our industry, and particularly at MFS. So it was actually a time with a lot of angst organizationally. And so it's very satisfying to look back where we are today, frankly, as a firm.
You mentioned something else, and since our subtitle on the new Wholesaler Masterminds Radio Show, this series of episodes is Lessons from Leaders, there's another lesson that's in there, listeners, and that's this lesson about how do you round yourself out by knowing things in your present role that will serve you in the future. So how much do you engage with your relationship management key account folks when they go into home offices? How much are you learning about home offices? Maybe not having the idea that is, well, that's not my job, because if you engage in that and get to know the account management or relationship management role from the person that is actually sitting in that chair or walking in those shoes, that can become very beneficial as you think about what your career trajectory might be within the business. So you come out of the president's role, and then the role expands still further, and it becomes co-head of global distribution. So just quickly, how does that now scale up in terms of responsibility and importance?
Well, so basically, myself and my partner, who was the other co-head, a woman by the name of Carol Jeremiah, who's been with the firm 35 years, she focused on her global institutional business primarily, and I would do the global financial intermediary business. So effectively, as opposed to just being focused on what we were doing the U.S. side with the intermediaries, started to work with our teams over primarily in Europe and Latin America. And that was interesting because I got a more of a global view of how mutual funds are used and distributed by advisors literally around the world. What I learned from it, Rob, is it wasn't that different in the United States. They may have a different vernacular, but at the end of the day, the core drivers of the business were pretty darn similar. And so Carol and I have operated in that structure. And kind of what I do take a lot of pride in, a lot of people see a co-head structure and figure it's two people that are going to be banging heads against each other for a year or two to see who survives. That certainly wasn't the case with Carol and I. We had a really collaborative effort between the two. Obviously very different markets, but at the end of the day, with a larger asset manager, having two people trying to tackle it worked well for us, and I've had a great relationship with her, and I think it served the firm quite well.
Now, your last role as you're departing is strategic advisor, and we should honor that for just a moment. What has that been about for the last 6 months?
Well, so I made the announcement to the firm last fall about my intentions to retire, and honestly, they asked me what my title should be, and I was perfectly comfortable. I said, I don't need a title of any sort, Rob. Maybe it's back to my wholesaling days, is that I feel like your credibility is the value of what you're doing. But somebody said, well, we have to have something on there for corporate purposes, and I have been helping the firm for the last 6 months in terms of transitioning client relationships and also working on some of the business development strategy over in Europe. So we decided to call it strategic advisor. But since the first of the year, I've been in a individual contributor role. So I'm kind of back to my roots in some respects. I've never been a guy caught up with title and the position. I think it's I think we make more of that. I think our clients judge our value based on the credibility you bring, not the thing that's on your business card.
Say that back again. Clients will base, and I'm paraphrasing now, will base their
assessment of you based on when they have a conversation. Are you bringing value with perspective about the industry, obviously your products, best practices, far more than any creative title that somebody may come up with a business card. Because frankly, people will see through it fairly quickly. If you could put on there that you're the CEO of the company, if when they talk to you, you don't bring that type of game, it doesn't matter. So I've never been big on positions, titles. I don't think it matters. I think your worth is the value you bring to the business.
Let's launch into our 6 questions. So are you bullish or bearish on wholesaling, Jim Jessee?
I'm absolutely bullish.
He says with enthusiasm.
Absolutely. Yeah. For a couple of reasons, but I'm going to give you a caveat at the end.
Yep.
The one thing is most of our clients, most of our FAs will never meet anybody from MFS or the asset manager other than the individual who shows up in their office.
Yep.
So the wholesaler is representing the organization, and the FA is going to base their opinion of the firm based on how that interaction is. So first of all, I think the importance of the role is huge. The other thing is that the FAs are hit with lots of things. There's a lot of demands on their time. Other wholesalers, other product partners, could be internal people who want to come see them. And so the caveat is this, I do think the financial advisor, the client, is going to boil down a handful of people that they'll take their time out of their day. Remember, these are still commission salespeople, ultimately. And so who are they going to spend their time with? And they're not going to do it with everybody. So I'm bullish on the great wholesalers in the industry, and I think there's a lot of great people carrying the bag. But I think if you are below average in your skill set and your engagement, I actually think that's where the pressure is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But the great people who are out in front of clients day in, day out, man, I would bet on that model every day of the week.
Now, you shared with me a bit of an anecdote about some reorganization that had happened inside of the firm, some positions that became available. And I'd just like you to tell that story because it was really interesting. It really helped bear out exactly what you're speaking to.
Yeah, we had last year, it was kind of through some unusual circumstances. They were really more personal in nature, that we had 3 really good territories become available for the company. And these were territories that year in, year out were close to the top of the charts on virtually every campaign and metric that we would do. And typically for us, our hiring process, it will take 6 to 9 months before we have a new person in place. So you got 3 really solid year in, year out territories, 3 different parts of the country that we had to replace. Last year, and we continue into this year, is we've been trying to highlight some of our expertise and capabilities in asset classes that are big industry sellers that we just don't have the market share. And it's a case where we feel like we've got the investment story and the performance that we can compete for those assets. And for the most part around the country, we moved the bar pretty dramatically in seeing our market share go up in those areas. But what's interesting is those 3 territories that went uncovered, they didn't move at all. In fact, the business actually went backwards on that asset class. And so it was a good reminder that at the end of the day, the financial advisor is probably not going to, on their own, go out and discover what other great capabilities does your firm have. Mm-hmm. They need somebody to show up, explain it, show how it could help in the portfolio, how it would be differentiated. So emails, going to our website, and frankly, even the efforts of the internal sales team, which we've got a strong group, they couldn't really move the bar in those 3 territories. I've heard, Rob, and I know you have, probably 15, 20 years, this concept that will the wholesalers exist in the future. One thing I would say is most of the people who will talk about that generally haven't carried the bag. They don't know how hard the job is, but they also don't know how impactful it is when done well. And I looked at that and I used that as an example of those 3 territories. Say, in the absence of somebody coming in, the FAs weren't changing their behavior. Now, did they continue to give us business in the products that they already bought and were happy with? Sure, but they couldn't get outside of and expand the relationship without somebody calling on them.
No, I love that example. Let's go to question number 2. Looking out 5 years, how do you think our industry changes?
Well, I think that to me, it's all about figuring out a way to better leverage your efforts and making the right calculated bets on where you're spending your time and what your conversations are about. So there's no doubt with the technology tools that we have available around the data from the firms and data that you may see from third-party providers, wholesalers should be able to make a better decision about where to allocate their time and kind of what their lead stories should be. I do think what's happening, and it's a bit of a cautionary note here, is it still is a business that you've got to figure out how you leverage your efforts in and of on your own, of going out and seeing big teams one-on-one. There's only so many people you can see through the course of the day. And so if, in fact, the group meetings are becoming harder to get, it puts a lot more pressure. If I'm going out and seeing an FA one-on-one, I better be making the right bet. But then the other thing is, what can I be doing to also amplify my efforts? So am I leveraging, you mentioned the key account team, am I really using them? Am I using my internal partner right? Am I using the specialist, DC specialist, product specialist? How do I create more interactions? And so that was true 30 years ago, and I would say it's true today. It still is a numbers business, and if it's harder to get the big stand-up lunch meeting or get the right advisors in there, what I would suggest to your audience is you got to figure out a way to make your one-on-one interactions, make more of them happen, because I don't think you can do 3, 4, 5 meetings in a day and hit the numbers you expect. Certainly not at a big asset manager. I think the other, and again, I hesitate that this is a big change, but and I know it's something that you've talked about, Rob, is there is a sea of sameness out there in distribution. And again, this is not just the wholesalers. It's you go to a meeting, you see all the key account managers with their booth and their literature lined up. You have internal people calling, kind of saying the same thing. I really think as a distribution professional, you've got to figure out a way to differentiate your value proposition in a positive way so that you stand on out and become memorable. Because if not, it just kind of seems like the same old interaction, and you may not be getting through. But those would be a couple things I think that folks should be thinking about. And
it's almost like someday, because you know that topic's near and dear to my heart. Someday, somebody, some firm, and I'm just going to use the word brave for a second. Some firm will be brave enough to approach our buttoned-up, staid, conservative business in a way that doesn't violate the trust of the investor or the trust of the advisor, but that breaks some of the molds in order to get out. And you could say, well, Vanguard does it because they do it on cost. Okay, well, that's one lever you could push. Or that another firm does it based upon their marketing approach. But to your point, nobody really pushes it in a way that is distinctly memorable, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And look, I'm not sure if you saw, about a month ago, Ignites had a survey that they did where they went out to financial advisors. And to me, this is kind of interesting. It gets back to my bullishness on wholesalers. But they asked financial advisors, hey, what matters to you when you deal with an asset manager? And no great surprise, the number one thing that FA said is, I expect good performance.
Yeah.
But the number two thing was the interaction with the wholesaler. And what they said is not necessarily what the corporate messaging was or what the company was trying to, but the individual who came in their office, was that somebody that they enjoyed the time with, that they trusted? So I think a lot of this is that the wholesaler taking the responsibility of what his or her brand is going to be when they walk in. I always enjoyed, and I what still gets me excited is talking to financial advisors about how are they acquiring new clients, how are they better servicing their existing clients, and trying to be more of an encyclopedia about sharing business practices. Because I found there was always a great thirst by the advisors. Now, many cases they may not have implemented what I said, but they seem to like talking about and would give me an audience to come back. And I still think that exists today. You couch it in a little bit different terms.
Yeah. Let's go to the next question.
Okay.
What's the one industry trend that concerns you the most?
Well, and this one does. And what I would say is, I think the time horizons that clients are judging their FAs and FAs are judging their asset managers is completely out of whack.
Oh.
And I think part of what has gotten us here is the industry has moved towards an advisory model, which has a lot of positives that come with that, One of the negatives is that I think the clients, and then translate to the FAs, are looking at perfectly good investments. They're demonstrated that they do certain things over reasonable periods of time, and start second guessing if they're not working for 1 year, 3 years, maybe even 5 years. We all know the average market cycle in this country is about 7 to 8 year experience. And the problem is if you start judging your managers based on underperforming in 3 years, you will get out of great investments at the worst possible time, and frankly, maybe buy styles that have just kind of gone through their period where they look good. And I know that sounds really basic, Rob, I can't believe after all the years of talking about lengthening time horizons, but I think it's actually much worse today because now that the advisor is concerned when they see that expense on the quarterly statement, they're going to fire me if I'm underperforming. I think what we need to do with our clients is give them the ammunition to look at the client and say, of course we're going to go through periods like this. That's to be expected. What I'm trying to do is get and solve for a financial goal that hopefully is not 1 or 3 years out, but hopefully 5, 10 plus years down the road. And that's how you need to analyze this stuff.
Part of the problem, it seems, is also aided, in this case negatively, by technology because, we always say that you have to be able to add value to the financial advisor experience because your simple performance and all the other ways that they need to find out about your product is available online. But part of the problem then becomes the immediacy of available information to a client/FA. When you and I first started wholesaling, there was a little bit of a opaqueness to information, not in a negative way such that we meant to keep anything from anyone, but it's just, you couldn't get at it except via certain means and over a certain frequency and certain time. But now you can, and so that feels like it aids this problem that you speak of.
There's no doubt. When you and I started back in the mid-'80s, most of the statements were still being generated by the Mutual Fund Company Service Center. When we would send out a statement, we would show you the number of shares and then what the price was. We actually never did the math for you to tell you what your value of your quarterly statement was. Once the brokerage firms brought them in-house and they show up on the normal monthly statement, I've always felt like the only number that the clients care about is the final one. If there's brackets around that number, they're not happy. And now, forget monthly. People, whether it's through the internet, through the different applications, they can look at it daily. But I think that's why a financial advisor, and frankly a wholesaler in describing their products, should be saying, if you're going to judge this thing in that type of time frame, you're never going to be around long enough to really see the benefit. Yep. The interesting thing to me, Rob, it's not just in retail. The institutional clients, in many respects, are even worse about it. And I just look back at my own experience. I have been you buy and hold good quality investments and you leave them alone. It actually works. We know it does. Yep. And I've seen little evidence that this moving money in and out of managers has actually led to a better investment experience for the end investor.
So if one of the problems or the trends that is concerning is the time frame in which the investor or the intermediary is judging the value /worth /performance of our product, that's the concern. What's the one trend that's got you most excited and hopeful in our industry?
Yeah, and particularly with from the wholesaler's standpoint, here's what I would say, is that with the increased complexity and pressure on the financial advisor, the value of the great wholesaler goes up, right? They've got lots of time pressure on them. They don't have time to do a lot of their own analysis research, so they're going to gravitate towards professionals that can help make their practices better and make their lives easier. I also think right now, my sense is that in the branches of the larger firms, there may not be as much internal sharing of sales ideas and what's working. one of the trends is, as the industry's gone more towards these mega teams, is those teams tend to stay fairly insular. So again, I think a great wholesaler walking to a branch saying, let me tell you about a couple of seminar ideas that I've done that have actually worked well. Let me tell you about what another team does to create a better client experience and share those ideas. I actually think there's a huge void in the business that used to be the branch manager or sales manager doing it. I think those individuals are so tied up with compliance, operation, administration, and recruiting that the wholesaler could become effectively the de facto sales manager. And once you've established that's your value, I think you'll be welcome every time you come into the town, because the FAs will be thirsty for that. So I think that is one of the things. And then the last thing I would say is, whether it's mutual funds, variable annuities, separately managed accounts, whatever your audience is involved in the distribution of, the one thing they all have in common is professional management, diversity, and at the end of the day, those vehicles work really well. It's proven. We go back to 1924. This stuff actually does exactly what we've as an industry have said. I would encourage your audience very much, make the industry better. Let's not necessarily get into the turf battles of my fund's better than yours. Make the industry better, make the financial advisor better, and I think we all have a very exciting future with that.
What a great thought. Let's this question has perhaps some unique application for you, because I'm guessing, and it's only a guess, but I think it's a well-calculated guess. You've been doing a fair amount of introspection as you head towards retirement. What three things would your today self tell your newer to the industry self about how to succeed and thrive and get ahead in our business?
Well, I have. I've thought a lot. I also have many of my children involved in the business. So, and the great thing with having a long goodbye is it's given me a chance to talk to a lot of internal and external audiences about kind of my views on career and the industry. The one thing I would say, Rob, is you make an impact. And I know that sounds very trite, but I can tell when I meet a wholesaler and just spend a little bit of time with them, is this individual really trying to make the client and the investor and the industry better, or are they really just doing it for their own self-interest? And you and I both know, because you've met a lot of them over the years, you can tell in about 3 minutes who falls in what category. Yeah. When you think about professions that you can have an impact on people, wholesaling, you have a chance to touch a lot of folks through the course of the day. In fact, you could probably argue, besides teachers and clergy members, you probably have a greater ability to have an impact on people's lives than virtually any other professional. And to me, that has been a big driver and gets me still very excited, even when I come in the office days. Am I making an impact? And I could tell you great stories about people I've seen where it's been incredible. Number two, and this kind of comes back, I know it's easy to look at my career and say, well, didn't look like you had to take a lot of risk. I thought giving up my territory and moving to Boston with 5 kids into an area of the country that I had never lived. I knew the climate was bad. The cost of living was certainly worse than Charlotte, North Carolina. But take a risk. If somebody is saying to you, hey, Rob, you may actually be good at something like this, you should listen to that person. And people saw something in Jim Jessee that I frankly did not see in myself. But there was a risk to it, and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna try. Look, at the end of the day, if I had fizzled and burned out in the leadership position, I figured I could go back and wholesale and do what I love doing. Yes. But I find a lot of times people, it may be a wholesaler looking at a role in their home office. Maybe it's the idea of going into a key account role. It may mean you have to take a bit of a step backward from an income standpoint. But I think taking a risk in your career to get better rounded is very important. And then the last I would just say is that, enjoy the ride. I mean, I think this is an incredible industry. I have really enjoyed 90% of what I get to do.
Yeah.
And it is sad to me to see people towards the end of their career where they're clearly, their heart's not in it. So figure out what you enjoy doing and get after it. And life is too short. As you start getting my age, you start thinking about that. It's sad to me to see people that are the other way. So those are the three things I would say.
No, those are awesome. So just to recap it: impact, take a risk, enjoy the ride. All resonate with me. The last one particularly so, I think, because in the moment of every day that a wholesaler walks with the bag, it's easy to get balled up in fill in blank here of what the day's problem was, what the production issue was. There's a post I wrote a while back about, you open your eyes, you grab your phone, you check your numbers, and that will dictate how your day is going to go or not for the next 24 hours. Enjoy the ride is really a wise piece of advice and counsel. Who was your greatest career influencer, and why was that person that way for you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. The one thing I would say is I've been really fortunate through nearly a 40-year career. I've had virtually all really good managers, very different in their approach, each one of them. But boy, I had a group of people that I could really learn from. The one in particular that I think about was actually the divisional manager for MFS who hired me back in late 1986. It's a fellow out of Atlanta by the name of Dick Gandy. Dick was part of the original wholesaling team at MFS in the 1970s. I am convinced you could put Dick Gandy today, 2018, in a territory, and he would be a great wholesaler. He would have responded to the differences in the business today, but kept the core drivers of business success. But here were a couple things, Rob, that Dick did that I thought was interesting. When I was interviewing with him, he asked me a question that kind of took me aback. He said, "Jim, tell me about your marriage and how strong is it?"
Wow.
And that one got me by a little surprise. At that point, Kim and I had been married, I think, about 5 years. We just had our first child. I said, Dick, so far so good. We seem to like each other. We're starting a family. And in any event, after the interview was done, he said, "I know that threw you off a little bit, but what I'm going to tell you is a big part of your success as a wholesaler is going to be driven based on how solid your family situation is." And he told me something that's resonated since. He said, and you may have heard this phrase, when you become a wholesaler, you get three things. You get a Rolex watch, you get a Mercedes, and you get a divorce. And he said, "Jim, I'm telling you, if you get that third one, you will have a hard time really making it." And the tough thing, as your audience knows, Rob, is these roles are hard on a family. Even if you have a small territory, if you're doing the job right, you're out in the evening with clients, you're doing seminars, you're doing some level of entertainment. So you need a family situation that everybody buys in and understands the sacrifices that you're making. And he was absolutely correct in what he said. Second thing he did is that there was a year in the early 90s that my brother Tom and I ended up 1 and 2 in sales in the company for the year. And so like most of your firms or the firms on out there, we have our annual sales meeting award presentation. And I noticed when he was at the podium, the way he was talking, he was saying, "Gosh, it's kind of unusual. We have 2 brothers, 1 and 2, really a neat thing to have." I thought it would be really impactful for their father, Walter Jessee, to be here and walk up and hand the award to his 2 sons.
Wow.
So I see from the back of the auditorium or the room we were in, my dad going on up to the podium.
And just to be clear, he has no relationship with MFS.
Oh, none.
Yeah,
none. He came out of sales and was actually national sales manager for a manufacturing company.
Wow.
But it did two things. Obviously, Dick honored my father for him to see that his two of his sons were doing okay. But also, as a son, as you know, to have your father see that regardless of their doubts, maybe when you're growing up, the kids are doing okay.
Yeah.
And so he was just that guy, and he was the one, some of the things I've talked about earlier, about go out and make FAs better before you launch into all your product details, because frankly, their biggest problem in their life is not that you've got better fun than the one they're doing. Help them take a positive attitude, because even back then, he'd say, Jim, you go in these branches, there's a lot of negativity. And so somebody to come in with a forward, here's what people are doing that are being successful. And, you know, we really thought we were on a mission from God. I mean, we were running around the Southeast doing crazy hours, but thinking, you know, we're making a difference. And that was so much more motivating. I never heard him talk about the financial rewards. And I'm not trying to minimize, because obviously I want to be paid well like everybody else. But the driver wasn't, hey, you can make more money by doing it. It's go make FAs better, go make the industry better. So I really think back at those lessons. And unfortunately, Dick passed away. I found out he had cancer in his late 40s and battled it for 8-9 years, and it passed like in 1997.
Mm.
And but boy, the legacy he left, Rob, I find myself trying to pass those things on all the time. So I loved your mentorship question. He was phenomenal, and I got a lot from him, obviously.
That's awesome. Jim, you know, I had this wild hair. I said I wanted to start doing some broadcasts about lessons from leaders. You heard the first show that we did.
I did. Yep, that was very good.
And this though is special because I get to catch you at the tail end of a wildly successful career. I've thoroughly enjoyed your engagement. I appreciate the amount of time that you put in to give thought to how we would spend our time together. I know you were concerned that we may not have enough to talk about when we could actually probably go on for another hour. I personally wish you nothing but success in retirement. I thank you for your leadership in the industry, and just thank you for being here on the show.
Well, Rob, thank you. And I really appreciate what you're doing along with the MMI about making the profession of distribution better. There's too many people out there on the other side talking about the future roles of wholesalers, and based on our conversation, obviously you and I don't believe that, but I really do believe making the wholesaler and the art of wholesaling better is a passion I have, and I know you've got it as well. So thank you for what you've been doing out there too.
I appreciate that so much. Wholesalers, come back next time for an episode of Lessons from Leaders on the new Wholesaler Masterminds Radio Show. For more information about Wholesaler Masterminds, visit us at wholesalermasterminds.com. Find the new Wholesaler Masterminds Radio Show at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify.